Again, I've known Bill. He's never been on the show before. For about 10 years or longer, I would always see him at the Second Amendment demonstrations we have. We were barely beating Democrats and Republicans who were trying to restrict the Second Amendment down to almost New York, style laws here in Texas. And of course, he has 2 different degrees in the field of psychology, and he's done a lot of research on the New World Order. He has a Bring Our Troops Home website with his wife with the yellow ribbon saying support the troops, bring them home. And he also has done a lot of other radio interviews that I've heard here locally. He's been doing a fabulous job. So I figured let's have Bill Veith in here with us today. Bill, just tell people about yourself, how you woke up to the New World Order, your whole view on the left-right paradigm, and then let's get into the Bretton Woods Agreement. Let's get into what fiat money systems are, the Federal Reserve, and what's happening today, and what it means to our financial futures.
Okay. Well, I probably up until about 6 years ago, I was stuck in a left-right paradigm, so I'm not predisposed to believing the way I've come to believe in the last 6 years. But in listening to programs like yours and other alternative media, I began to do my own search for the truth and stopped being so dependent on the mainstream media news. So what I've focused my research on was, back when they used to say, if you really want to know what's going on, follow the money. So I started following the money backwards, and I followed it all the way back to the people that print it out of thin air. And it's really not money, it's a system of worldwide credit. And so that's what got me started. And then I realized that probably my conclusion is that if we were to magically go back to an honest money system of gold and silver coin rather than this fiat currency credit system, 99% of the world's problems would magically disappear if we could do that.
The elite gets so much power out of the power to coin the money. I mean, we always hear debates about who's wealthy, who's rich, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. They're small players compared to the old moneyed families that have their funds in tax-free foundations that literally own entire industries, entire countries, entire armament factories. I mean, these people are the true elite.
Absolutely. I've read estimates that the Rothschilds' net worth is between 100 and 400 trillion, which dwarfs anything Bill Gates said.
Yeah, a top Russian economist pegs it in between there at 300 trillion.
Okay, that's within the range that I've read.
They've got about 55% of the world's wealth.
Yes, and probably if you add a few other dynasty families in there, it's probably closer to 75 or 80%.
Oh, exactly. Just the Rothschilds alone, they said the Rockefellers have got about 25% of it. And by the way, this is major economic schools overseas know this. It's taught. In fact, people who are really in high-level finance, they all discuss this. It's all understood. There's almost like a false, fake facade that the general public's given. Let's get into the Federal Reserve. I mean, I know you've got your notes there. I've heard you go over it before. The best way you found to explain this to the layman out there and why this system you believe isn't good.
Okay. I would say the best way to explain it is by really going back to the basics, which almost seems so simplistic. It seems ridiculous, but I've asked over 250 people the question, what is the definition of a dollar? No one's ever gotten it right, and until a year ago, I didn't even know what it was. Here I've gone through the education system of formal education. I've got 2 doctorate degrees, and I never learned what a dollar was until I went and researched it on my own. And the reason that's so important, what a dollar is, a constitutional dollar, is a United States manufactured coin of 371.25 grains of silver. And that's its value. Its value is not measured in economic terms. It's measured in its weight in silver in a coin.
And that makes it very hard to manipulate.
You can't manipulate it because you cannot change the value of it if its weight is in silver. For example, the value of an inch is not measured in economic terms. It's measured in its length. Okay, Congress has no authority to change the value of an inch or the value of a second or the value of an ounce. Those are our standard weights and measures. It's the same with a dollar.
And when you have honest weights and measures, it engineers the economy to be based in a free market system where actual labor and ideas are valued and those individuals rise. But in a fiat system, it allows these wicked control freaks to get total control.
Well, absolutely. And the main reason it does that in the free market system is the dollar, you have to have a constant. that never changes value, and then you can measure the change in every other dependent variable if you have that constant independent variable. But in the fiat dollar, it floats, so we never know what its value is, so we can never accurately measure the change in the value of anything else because we're never holding anything constant. So it doesn't matter if it's a silver coin. We could have our standard unit of measurement for money could be a bag of sand, and as long as we hold that constant and never change it, we can still measure the value of everything else.
It could be salt, it could be in the past slaves, it could be armaments, it could be seashells with 2 holes in them.
Right. It can be anything as long as you hold one thing constant. But if we allowed the value of our inch to float every day, it would mess up our whole world. We couldn't measure anything. We wouldn't know what we were getting.
And that's part of the deception. Not only do these elites literally own the private printing presses known as the world's central banks, and then invade countries that don't have those and install those central banks as control systems that control the entire economic system. At the same time, the people aren't able to truly measure what's really happening to them, and it's simply they have their view economically based on the propaganda.
Absolutely, and like when you say propaganda, see, we've allowed them to control the language. And I call it verbicide. They have literally done homicide on the verbiage.
Well, that's what Eric Blair, known as George Orwell, wrote about. Is how they were destroying words, shortening words, manipulating their meanings. To where now, it's not that I'm even that smart, but now it's hard for me to even communicate with even educated people because they've been given, a false lexicon or a false encyclopedia, and they can't even communicate now.
That's exactly right. And one of the main things they've done it with is the dollar. They've changed they haven't changed what a constitutional dollar is. They've only changed the verbiage that describes it. So now we have a fiat dollar that we call a dollar, and it's not a dollar. It's a unit of debt. It's a piece of paper that signifies there is a debt out there.
Here's an example. If we would have stayed on the silver system or the gold system, which some of the Arabs, even the Chinese, are now trying to move to, which is really going to mess us up, if we would have done that, Bush in 5 years wouldn't have been able to devalue the dollar by design by 44%. George Bush and his globalist controllers, make no mistake, he's a puppet, wouldn't have been able to play all these games. I mean, that is a huge tax on your wealth. And now the new Fed chief is saying it's unlimited. They're going to go wild. And then the banks, by the way, are able to loan out 9, 10, sometimes 20 times per dollar you put in the bank. They then loan out fiat currency that's just on a sheet of paper or in a computer, and then they want you to default. They want you to not pay the credit cards. They want you to not pay for the mortgage. Then they get real tangible assets, and it's a Ponzi scheme isn't a strong enough word. It is a carnival barker grifter shell game.
Absolutely. These, basically we have global loan sharks. And what they lend, they create out of thin air. They create it out of nothing. They lend credit. And to them it's credit, to us it's debt. And they are putting the world in debt through this false monetary system.
And it's really, to use a physics term, it's a black hole where nothing can escape. It is designed to build to a certain point and then blow the Ponzi scheme, and then everyone basically becomes sharecroppers who owe their souls to the company store. It's that same thing of where they would pay people, sharecroppers were basically slaves that didn't know it, not enough to ever get out of debt, and they'd buy everything at inflated prices from the company store. You have people for generations that are literally slaves.
Absolutely. Well, it's the same principle as, suppose 4 of us sat down to play the game Monopoly, and we all get a certain amount of money to start the game to purchase properties so we can collect rent on those properties. Well, suppose one of those 4 entities playing the game could reach under the table and had an unlimited supply of these Monopoly dollars.
Ooh, that's a better analogy. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, you can take it. I mean, that guy will wind up with all of the property on the board, and everybody else will be a renter or a debtor to that person.
Yeah, you and I get $100 a piece, and then he's got an 18-wheeler full of hundreds.
Right, or he's got an endless supply. He creates it out of thin air. You can't beat him.
And then he even loans it to us for real assets we've got.
Exactly. You cannot beat that game.